I'm about to answer 99.73621,373% of all the questions about the memory palace technique in a very, very simple way, just by looking at the structure of how many people ask about memory palace approaches. So, how is that? Well, they usually say, can I use a memory palace like my childhood school? Or can I use the truck that I drive to work? Or can I use a red memory palace, a yellow memory palace, a green memory palace? Can I use the buttons on my shirt as a memory palace? And so on. And the answer is always the same. There are no memory palace police that are going to come and arrest you if you do. So please do. Please experiment. This is the number one answer to can I questions. Give it a try. If what you attempt doesn't give you the desired results, come back to the foundations that I teach on this channel. By the way, this is Dr. Anthony Metivier. If we haven't met, welcome. And if you're new here, get subscribed, hit that thumbs up. And you know, one of the most beautiful things about my work is that I have spent a decade now answering questions, and I really needed a video where I just lay out some answers to some of the most common questions. And there are very many variations in the can I question, but typically, almost always, the answer is give your idea a try. I remember that I tweeted this one time, and the legendary Ron White, who I've interviewed on this channel, he responded as if this was the best answer under the sun. But yes, I've really advocated this experimentation. Now, what are the other options? Well, we often think about memory techniques as an art. So there's the famous Art of Memory by Frances Yates, who was a woman, by the way. A lot of people tell me when they find out that she's a woman that they thought it was a man. She's a woman, and there's a wonderful biography about her. And the quirky thing about the Art of Memory is that she, by her own admission, never actually used the techniques that she's talking about, which I think has caused a lot of issues in the world, and I've been blessed to help correct some of those. But Art of Memory, that totally makes sense. It is an art. Lynn Kelly has talked about memory as craft. Her book, Memory Craft, is absolutely fantastic. But it's not just an art or a craft. Memory is also a science. And I love how Tony Buzan, while he was still with us, used to talk about how we are all like artists and scientists when it comes to memory. But unfortunately, we've lost that childlike play, that ability to just get out there and run experiments, to do what art is. Art is usually a bit experimental, if not totally experimental. And you know, I'm not going to claim that I'm an artist, but I do experiment with art, and I come up with weird stuff like this because I experiment and just working with different color combinations and just ideas. Now, one of the problems that I have is that I don't see images very well in my head, and so when I wanted to create this character who's in one of my novels, I had to think about how I was going to do it, because he went into Houdini's grave and stole Houdini's teeth to make a custom, I don't know what you would call it, sunglasses from Houdini's teeth. It's just weird. But anyway, I just had to work it out. I had to experiment, and I had to actually try to paint it in order to see what it might look like, because I just don't have that image in my head. And that's what we do with our memory techniques. We experiment. Okay, the next common question that I get a lot is, how do I place information in a memory palace? And this is almost the same answer. You experiment. Here's the problem with teaching memory techniques, and I don't know how to solve it necessarily. What we're doing in our minds is not necessarily explainable in language. So I often just say, place an association in your memory palace. And then some people say, well, what does that mean, place it? Are you putting it on a table in your memory palace? Or are you somehow weaving it into the wall? Or how are you connecting it? Now, in my experience, I don't connect the associations that I use in a memory palace at all. I just place them there. So let's say I'm memorizing architectonic tautology. I'm just going to stick an archer in this corner, and I'm not going to have him remove a book from the bookshelf. I'm not going to have him shoot an arrow into the wall. He's just going to be there. You might think of him as kind of floating in space, but I place him there, and that's the word that I use. But the words don't really matter. It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it anything. You could call it stitching it into place. You could call it magnetizing it into place, which is something that I use. And it may be part of the reason why that I use that word magnetic in the magnetic Mary method is because when I place them there, they just seem to stick like a fridge magnet sticks. But in this case, it's kind of a weird fridge magnet that never actually touches the magnet. It couldn't touch the magnet even if it tried because it's an imaginary magnet. It's just something that's happening in the imagination. So how do you place information in a memory palace? You experiment. You explore what it means for you to use this technique, which is essentially recreating a room or a journey in your mind, indoors, outdoors. There's many ways to do it. And then taking associations that help you remember target information. So if it's architectonic tautology, an archer is one of the most obvious associations that you could possibly use for that, but you might use the golden arches, right? And there's other pieces that you're going to want to put in there to help you remember tautology or tectonic, etc. And there's ways to do that. You just use it one image at a time and you have them interact. But the exact words, those can't be the hill we die on. It has to be that you explore and experiment, and if you come up with words that work for you, great. But try to avoid expecting that those are the words that are going to work for everybody under the sun. The reason why year after year there's new memory improvement books that have new terms in them that describe essentially the same thing is because each person has to come to the traditional wisdom of memory and process it for themselves. And that idea of processing the traditional wisdom of memory for yourselves is something that I learned from this guy. It's what he says in this book. If you want to know what it is, leave me a comment below and I will let you know the title if you aren't able to figure out what it is just by looking at his face. But it's a key point that he makes. Each of us has to interpret the traditional wisdom on our own. Through what? Through experimentation. Okay, this next question is kind of a fun one. People ask me all the time, Anthony, why do you think that the memory palace is the ultimate technique? You're always going on and on about it as if it's a panacea that corrects all evils in the world. This is a very good question, and they're not wrong for thinking that. However, I think we're missing a point. We're missing a couple of points. First, I focus on the memory palace technique because it's a word that describes something that is a larger principle, which is location-based mnemonics, and the fact that all information is in space. Remember when we talked about the architectonic tautology images that we could use an archer or we could use the golden arches. Well, when I said those things, maybe you thought of Robin Hood as an archer. That information is somewhere in the space of your mind. Not only is it in the space of your mind, as in the concept of your mind being a space that you have access to, but it's literally in your brain cells. If the brain is real, then there are positive and negative ions flowing around and neuronal connections, and those are the places, the spaces, in which those concepts and images exist. Now, take that a step further. Where are the golden arches? They're in the world, and that restaurant that has golden arches has words, and those words are in the world, in space. You cannot make sense of the name of that restaurant, McDonald's, if you don't have M next to C, or however the word is spelled that we're talking about. Same thing, if we're reading a book about Robin Hood, it needs to be that R is beside O, which is beside B, which is beside I, which is beside N, in order to make the word Robin. And it needs to be on the page that we're reading in a sentence. Now, this is really important because it comes to the next question. Why, Anthony, are the memory palace techniques only good for lists? This is a misconception. Memory palaces do deal with lists, but every word in a sentence is a list. This sentence I'm speaking now is a list of words used to make the sentence I'm speaking now. And when I memorize my TEDx talk, for example, I'm just memorizing endless lists of lists. So my TEDx talk is a list of sentences that I memorized in order, and every sentence is a list of the words in the sentence. So it's not really a very useful objection or really a way of thinking about it. Yes, it's a list or a list of lists, but What we're doing is we're essentially using it to memorize information. And if we take this to another sort of realm, like language learning, what we can do is we can memorize things in such a way that they escape the linear nature of information. So imagine this. You have a memory palace with 10 stations, and you memorize 10 individual words in that memory palace. Whatever language it is, you have 10 words. You get them into long-term memory. Then you return to the memory palace and you add a sentence to each of those words. Well, now you have the ability to not only use the individual words on their own, but to express them in sentences. Now imagine that those 10 sentences are the expression of a verb conjugated in a particular tense. Well, now that you've done this, you've given your mind a set of examples of conjugation, which then will equip you to spontaneously conjugate that verb in other sentences that you haven't memorized. So you've escaped the linearity by embracing it. Okay, so this is how it works, and all of those words are in the space not only of your brain, but they're in the space of transmission as they flow through the airwaves, because you're vibrating air, and then they go into the ears of the people that you're listening and vibrate the cochlea and the stirrup and the hammer, and all that stuff does all the operations to get that information into their brain, or rather, better said, trigger the information that is already located in the space of their brain. And it happens in a linear fashion because every sentence is a list of the words in the sentence. So to answer those questions, I focus on the memory palace technique precisely because it is so powerful for escaping linear information by using linearity to get information deep into long-term memory so that you can utter unique sentences and phrases and recall information in any order that you want. And when we take it to the thing of like a TEDx talk, I got interrupted in that talk. People laughed at a time when I wasn't expecting it. And I was able to get back on track by actually saying a spontaneous utterance that was not in the speech and finding my way back to what was in the speech. And I even added a couple of other things as I went along, and it was possible to follow a linear track and have spontaneity. And this is possible in many, many ways when you use memory techniques in a dedicated manner, in a consistent way over time. And I think you'll soon see that linearity is just a concept and you are not imprisoned by it, and any kind of constraint that it puts on you is going to free you in the end. So, as Tony Buzan said, the rules will set you free. Now, another question I get all the time, I absolutely love this question. It's something that is nuanced and something you can think about for a long time, or you can just practice and experiment, which is how do you reuse memory palaces? Now, this comes back to the memory palace police. Yes, you can use memory palaces and you can reuse memory palaces, and you do not have to ask anybody's permission, and the memory palace police are not going to come and cause any trouble if you reuse memory palaces. So, if you would like more detail than just, yeah, go ahead, reuse memory palaces, and you want to avoid some of the classical problems, please, well, with thanks to our channel members and to everybody who's here, who's hit that thumbs up, who's gotten subscribed. If you're not already subscribed, I really, really appreciate each and every one of you. I would suggest that if you want more nuance and detail, remembering that content may be king, but context is God, I would encourage you to watch my definitive guide to reusing a memory palace next.